This is a presentation about translating the novel Zettel's Traum by Arno Schmidt from German into English. The great translator John E. Woods did this by translating one page a day for 6 months of the year, then working on other projects for the next 6 months, and returning to Zettel's Traum for another 6 months. Under this system, it took him 6 full years of work spread out over 12 years' time to translate Schmidt's magnum opus. Bottom's Dream in English was published in 2016, and in 2021, I began reading it with an international online reading group. We have met almost every week since early summer of 2021, so almost 2 full years at this point. We've read books 1 and 7 and are well underway now with book 2. Last autumn, on October 29th, 2022, John Woods visited our group to talk with us about how he translated Zettel's Traum. We looked at the opening lines of book 3 together, German side by side with English, and listened as he talked through his translation choices. This presentation reconstructs some of that conversation. Let's dive into book 3, entitled Dan's Cottage, a Diorama. This is page 315 in Schmidt's original typoscript and page 317 in the English translation. It's the first page of book 3. Die Verzwecktheit des Universums treibt, scheint's, einem neuen Maximum entgegen. Woods said about this line that the first word that struck him as a translator was the word Verzwecktheit, because it doesn't exist in German. There is the adjective verzwickt, which means complicated, and that comes from the verb verzwecken, which is an old word for graft, as in botanical grafting of an apple tree, for example. So there is this weird word, this weird noun, Verzwecktheit. And in the left marginal note, we see Flora and Thalia, or gems of flowers and poetry, a reference to horticulture. This marginal note is actually a quotation from a review that Edgar Allan Poe wrote of a book called Flora and Thalia. Woods thought that Verzwecktheit brought to Schmidt's mind this citation of Poe because of the botanical connection. Let's have a closer look. The definition of Verzwecken at the top left comes from the German dictionary of Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm, and there's even a bit of English in it. Verzwecken means to fasten something with driving a wedge, peg, or pin into it. So there's the connection to grafting, where two plants are fastened together. That makes Schmidt think of Poe and his review of Flora and Thalia, which appeared in the Southern Literary Messenger in 1836. The text on screen comes from the website of the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore. And on the right are a couple of pages with illustrations from the book that Poe was reviewing, which, as the title suggests, arranges color plates of flowers with botanical descriptions and corresponding poetry. Returning to the translation, we see that John Woods was in a tough spot with regard to the word Verzwecktheit. The question for the translator was, could he retain the reference to plants and grafting, or is he driven somewhere else? And what came up for Woods was the word intricacy, spelled T-R-I-C-K, intricacy. So there's a play on words that is not in the original. That was the important thing. He couldn't retain the horticultural reference, and the Poe would have to stand there as it stands, without the English reader being able to see its connection to the main column. But even a good German reader might be unlikely to make the connection of Verzwecktheit to its original meaning to graft, because of its obscure etymology. With the word intricacy, Woods sought to create a sentence that was something like the German. Die Verzwicktheit des Universums treibt, scheint's, einem neuen Maximum entgegen. In the English, the intricacy of the universe is moving, 'twould seem, toward a new maximum. So the English retains much of the same flow of the prose. And we see that the translation of the first sentence of Book 3 is driven by the word intricacy. Then Woods describes being suddenly pulled into a visual image in the following sentences, one of the joys for him of Schmidt's writing. Paul, zurückgelehnt im leichten Korbsessel. Apparently, Paul has made this comment about die Verzwicktheit des Universums. Paul, zurückgelehnt im leichten Korbsessel. Wilma hatte ihm Shorts aufgezwungen. Und wenn ich nicht ganz irisch war, ließ dafür, aus Bosheit, ihn hervorlugen. Now the English. Paul, leaning back in his light wicker chair. There's not much you can do with that, Woods says. It is what it is. Wilma had forced him into a pair of shorts. Aufgezwungen means forced, so that's that. But now coming up, Woods has an opportunity that Schmidt didn't have. The German, und wenn ich nicht ganz irisch war, Woods translates as, and if I wasn't totally nuts. And suddenly again, we are presented with the visual of Paul in the wicker chair. And he was, out of malice, letting it peep out. The word peep works very nicely, Woods says, because you have P, so the penis is in there, and so we've got nuts and penis. Woods says of his translation process that it is not analytical, but rather that there is a well of language happening in him that creates as he goes, which discovers nuts, not because he wanted it, but it's just there. And so he's trying to enrich the text in the ways he can, conscious of the fact that he's losing all kinds of things from the original, like the connection of Verzwicktheit to grafting, and then from there to Flora and Thalia. To compensate, he puts in something else, like the word peep for hervorlugen, which has a valence in English that the German doesn't. This is translation as a kind of balancing of the aesthetic of the text, but Woods has to be careful, he says. The text is Schmidt's, not his, and he never wants to become the controlling instance of that aesthetic. For example, in the next sentence, Schmidt writes the word Gott Abgeschiedenheit, which is a play on the German words Gott verlassen, meaning God forsaken, and Abgeschiedenheit, meaning remoteness or seclusion. So the resonance of the words forsaken and seclusion give Woods the word God for seclusion, a lovely word in English that is as playful as the German, but not quite exactly the same thing. The important thing is that it retains Schmidt's aesthetic of playfulness with words. Woods saw what we were doing in our group as the opposite of what he had had to do with Schmidt's text as a translator. That is, we were deconstructing and analyzing it, asking questions about voice, typography, citations, narrative, plot, organization, argumentation, and so on. Whereas Woods was letting himself be driven to his results by language. What happens in terms of pure language was the most important thing for him. It's from the ear, he said, that you can hear if a translation is working or not. The places where he stumbled when reading his translation out loud were the places that he knew something was wrong. John Woods died in February of this year. We were so fortunate that he was generous enough to visit our group to talk about this masterpiece of translation shortly before he passed away. He was a lovely man and a brilliant translator, and I hope this video honors him by sharing some of those insights of his craft that he shared with us.